The extent to which you think this is now becoming the defining issue, perhaps, if that's the right word, ahead of the French local elections coming up?
Political violence is comparatively relatively low compared to the middle of the 20th century in France. There's been a little bit of an uptick since 2022 with the campaign of Éric Zemmour, and there's a sense that far-right activists are feeling emboldened by the prospect of a potential victory. But in terms of historical trends, the situation is not that bad, so I worry that excessive covering of the events may kind of give reasons to believe that society is going worse than it actually is going.
Tell us about this quote, call it the stairway to terrorism.
We all have a tendency to selectively expose ourselves to only sources that we agree with. We all have a tendency to not pay too much attention to people who disagree with us politically. We tend to caricature opposing viewpoints and to have low curiosity and low intellectual humility when it comes to exploring new, political vantage points. In many respects, political extremism is just those traits that most people have, you and I as well, carried to the extreme with maybe the added element of extreme levels of dehumanization of those who are perceived as being the political opponents. Group dynamics that reels in some young males in general to consent to political violence and beat up basically the other side. We shouldn't be looking at that with too much naivete or condescension. There is partisan thinking in us already, and it's only like a radical form or radicalized form of it. And we should be attuned to understanding the mechanisms of partisan thinking, of radicalization, and be a bit more motivated to fight it in general education. I would agree that things may become amplified and may get worse in digital environments in which hostile messages are over-promoted. We only have access of those most extreme tokens of what people think in society, and that's what the social media tend to do. It's called the social media prism effect. We underestimate the fact that most people in society are relatively moderate. We only see those people who are most motivated to write, and those will be over-promoted by engagement maximizing algorithms. So that's a reality. I don't try to downplay that. But I would also want to highlight that our psychological disposition for polarization, delegitimization and dehumanization of the other side is not new, and that's part of human nature.
President Macron is meeting again to look at some of these extremist militant groups, how much it works to dissolve parties, militant groups.
By doing so, the state sends a strong signal of we don't want those ideas and we don't want those kinds of people to be walking around expressing themselves freely on the street and on social media. So there's a sort of deterrence intention behind it, but there are also negative side effects potentially. It becomes harder for the renseignements généraux, for the national intelligence, to infiltrate and monitor those people if they don't have a legal or physically observable existence anymore, so it can potentially backfire. And it's entirely an empirical question which mechanism is going to prevail. Any way of orienting future events that make what just happened in Lyon with Quentin a little less incendiary, a little less polarized, a little less divisive is good to take. We need it in those times of turmoil. I think it can only help if some moderate, calm voices calm for calm and try to lower the temperature.
Huge questions now on the France Insoumise. These are areas which was constant accusations towards National Rally.
The selective blaming of those you don't like and the tendency to systematically forget that your side may have also committed some faults, etc., is a classic of political psychology. We all tend to be hypocrites when it comes to politics, especially politicians. They will, systematically blame the other side and forget that their own rhetoric or their own decisions may have contributed to the situation of conflict. It's mostly the far right that commits political violence and that kills in France. 90% of ideologically motivated murders in the French streets are committed by the far right. Only 10% is committed by the far left, as far as we know. Marion Maréchal Le Pen saying that 90% of murders are committed by the far left is just total fake news, and that's a disgrace. I'm seeing the far right trying hard to make for themselves a new reputation of opposing violence, etc. This they've been pretty successful at, I think, but the figures are so clear that most of the violent riots and mobs that we're having on the French territory right now are organized by the far right. I think people know that, people are not stupid, and if journalists do their job, they should disseminate that key information.
A group of people protesting with placards in Paris this week saying the far left kills, juxtaposed with images that wasn't Quentin. It was an AI kind of generated image of somebody that, well, it gets into the realms of fake news.
LLMs and Gen AI have invaded our lives, and political parties are obviously jumping on the occasion to produce, mass persuasion effects at a low cost. We should be very watchful of those developments because, of course, they can be highly deceitful, that they kind of borrow the code of verbal communication. In verbal communication, it's normal to speak in abstract terms about things, but in visual communication, there was that norm that you should only use the pictures that literally represent what is being represented. And with Gen AI, you give yourself the liberty to basically create a stereotype of the situation you're trying to portray, and that gives you much more leeway in terms of rhetoric and potentially also deception.